Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment, for the Sony Duo 13. Now this of course is pretty much an update to the original Duo 11, which has now been discontinued in favor of newer machines like the Tap 11, which is not yet formally announced in terms of a release date. Of course, it has been shown off already, and really impressive, and I can see why Sony's gone that route in order to take on Surface head on. The Duo, on the other hand, has been refined, polished, and now you see before you a 13.3-inch version. Already I did unbox this and pretty much give all of you a good idea of what to expect at its $18.99 and change price point, which here in the States and anywhere else in the world is a lot of money for an Ultrabook, even though this may be one of the best on the market. And so far, in my experience, the 13 really does deliver on everything that the 11 originally brought to the table, with some very important enhancements and improvements, which I'll be going over through the course of this full review. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, this is a $1,900 machine before tax here in the States without any EDU discount, so full retail, which is considerably higher than the original pricing for the Duo 11. Granted, this is a larger device. You have a 13.3-inch Full HD triluminous display from Sony, rather than the 11.6-inch Full HD IPS display that they originally used. Still a very big bump in price because we're looking at here, as I mentioned in my unboxing, a Core i7 configuration with 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gig solid state drive, comparable to what I had in the Duo 11 build. And in terms of pricing, the Duo 11 was originally a $1,600 machine before tax, I believe, whereas again, this is a $1,900 machine. So Sony clearly capitalizing on the fact that they know the 11 sold well, but they are now embracing a market that really wouldn't have necessarily looked at the 11 simply because of screen size. So more of a shift towards a real Ultrabook replacement, in my opinion, for the broad spectrum of users out there, those of you who weren't part of the niche looking for an 11.6-inch Windows 8 hybrid. Well, now you've got a more complete computing experience that still delivers on the tablet capability. So with that intro out of the way, let's go straight to the first and foremost, at least in my opinion, most important upgrade to most users out there, which I mentioned already, is the screen. So this triluminous 13.3-inch Full HD display is probably what's going to draw most of you to this machine out of the gate. And that's because, yes, as I mentioned, many things have been changed in design, but the actual screen size as well as keyboard are probably the most important new enhancements on this model. There are other things like the port arrangement, which has been relocated. All of the ports are now on the back of the machine, which I'll be showing you a little bit later. The actual start button has also been changed. On the Duo 11, we had a curved start button that kind of wrapped itself around the front angle of the tablet end of this machine. Now it's actually flush, and Sony's brought this new button design to all of their latest and greatest with regard to Ultrabooks and actual laptops running Windows 8. Windows 8, not really going to comment on the OS. If you're here watching this, then you clearly have no problems with it. I find it reliable, useful, and it does, at least for now, provide the best of both worlds. No other manufacturer has an OS to accommodate this, and that's one of the reasons that Sony has really brought together a great piece of hardware, both in the original Duo 11 as well as here in the 13. So I really like this display, but one thing I want to tell you all right now is that when I put it up against the original Duo 11, it simply doesn't look as good. It does cover a wider gamut of colors by Sony's specifications. It's part of the triluminous, new marketing. However, it just doesn't have as good viewing angles. But that does come with a caveat, which is that the Duo 11 had a burn-in issue. Not anything serious. I haven't seen it here yet, but it's possible that over the course of time, people may see that as well. And basically, what I'm talking about with the burn-in, and many of you may be saying, how's that possible with an LCD? It has mostly to do with refresh rates. And because we jump in and out of a traditional desktop mode and then back to the Metro UI, you are going to, unfortunately, occasionally see a little bit of burn-in from different icons and things that will permanently stay docked in the traditional desktop format. But with that said, this display is still one of the best you're going to find in the marketplace. In fact, on brand new, especially Haswell-based machines like this, if you're not familiar with Haswell, that's Intel's latest generation of CPU. And that's another thing I want to give kudos to Sony on, because it's very rare that Sony steps out with a product with the latest hardware. But that seems to be a new trend for Sony, which is definitely a good thing. Generally, they're late to market with processors and other internals kind of abiding by the same rule that Apple has in the past, that it's more about presentation and performance than necessarily the latest and greatest hardware, but here they've taken a turn for the better, in my opinion. So, this is one of the first hybrid tablet convertibles out there for Windows 8 that does support Haswell and all of the other latest and greatest when it comes to memory and SSD performance. Again, the screen, best in class, no question about it, but those of you moving from a Duo 11 will probably notice that the viewing angles have fallen off a little bit, mostly from the bottom end of things, and most users aren't going to necessarily be laying with this on their lap in bed or on a couch, and so that's probably a big reason that the viewing angle is less important, but still something I want to point out. Overall, in terms of actual gaming and things like that, this display is a pleasure. So even though it may not be as bright as the original Duo 11, there's no question you gain a lot by getting the extra space. If you're playing a game, doing any kind of editing, we're talking photo or video, granted you can only do light stuff with a machine like this, even with an i7 configuration, because these are low voltage processors, you're still going to benefit from that extra screen space. The next thing I want to go to is the keyboard, because that again is one of those major enhancements that I think most of you are going to be excited about, because much like the screen was something for many users to overcome with the Duo 11, and that's why they couldn't find themselves spending that much on a machine that they felt was too much like a tablet in terms of form factor. Now you've got that machine that not only hits it off in the correct form factor for you for screen size, but also a much more functional keyboard. Now that's not only in terms of the actual size, you can see already substantially larger than the original Duo 11. You actually have pretty much a keyboard like you'd find on any Ultrabook on the market. The only thing that's really different is the actual touchpad, and you may have noticed it's really, really small. But if you're familiar with the Duo line, then you know that the 11 didn't have a touchpad, rather an optical point, essentially, that was placed right in the middle of keyboards like we've seen for many, many years from many different manufacturers. Sony, of course, was using that back in the original picture book. I'm going back to the late 90s now. But the whole point is that someone over at Sony realized they had to do something a little bit different. That was part of the feedback they took in on this model. And so we now have a touchpad, and it works relatively well. I know you can't really catch on-screen stuff. You'll see the mouse right now over the video icon. Far from perfect, but certainly serviceable. And there's no question I would take the actual touchpad over anything else. Specifically, of course, I'm referring to the actual optical pad that was found on the Duo 11. One thing I do want to point out about this touchpad, the drivers, oddly enough, were not installed out of the box, so that was something I had to do. In other words, multi-touch did not function. So something noteworthy for those of you who are curious how well this machine works out of the box. Quite a bit of bloatware, but overall, again, very pleased with it, and I think it does set the standard right now for convertible expectations. Moving along, so again, keyboard great. You can see they've also, part of the design is that we now have this ridge along the sides. And basically, that just allows for very easy handling, as you may notice right now as I pick it up. Much more natural to pick up the machine in this fashion than what the Duo 11 accommodated for, which is basically nothing. There was no actual design cue with regard to this, far more of an industrial look. So here, just Sony acknowledging that they needed to work on the overall ergonomics of this machine, and that's not because the Duo 11 was disappointing, it's just because they know they had to learn from their first launch, and it's good to see a company actually making changes that are progressive, and again, predominantly a response to user feedback. So moving away from the keyboard, I want to talk about actual internals. But of course this is backlit, by the way, for those of you wondering. If you do a custom configuration, I think they do you do have to pay extra for the backlit keyboard. I'm not positive on that. I stand corrected if I'm wrong, but otherwise all of the pre-configured machines, i5, i7, right now do come with a backlit keyboard, which is relatively even, again, in line with what I expected from, or what was delivered, I should say, from the Duo 11. Now, closing the machine back up for a moment, I want to talk about the actual performance. It has an i7, as I mentioned, Haswell. The biggest gain here really is battery life. This machine is almost the exact same weight as the Duo 11. You're looking at a 13.3-inch replacement that only gained less than, I believe, 1/4 pound. So that's really significant considering the battery life is in line with what the Duo 11 delivered with the extended battery sheet. So you're actually looking at close to 10 hours. Sony quotes it at 10, but I'm going to say close to 10 because it really does depend what you're doing with this machine, whether you're just watching video that's HD, playing games, whatever it may be. it's going to have a different effect on battery life. But the brilliance here, of course, with Haswell, is the brand new battery life. And that's what we all expected from Haswell, those of us who had expectations for this new 4th gen CPU. And that's where it really does deliver. It's not a marketing ploy. This is something where there's a reason there is no extended battery sheet for this model. And that's because it does perfectly fine on its own. Now, the original Duo 11 ranked in at under 5 hours, pretty much in line with everything else in the market that was running an Ivy Bridge processor, even a 3rd gen one at that. So Haswell's big improvement really isn't necessarily in something you're going to see in day-to-day other than battery. I want those of you out there, the majority, to know that is the key difference you're going to get with this 13-inch model and any other Haswell-driven device in the marketplace. Battery life is what it's all about. In terms of the graphics performance, I know I'm not doing a gaming demo for all of you right now, but pretty much the same performance we got from the Duo 11. We're going from the HD 4000 chipset to the 4400, which is an improvement. It does definitely outbench the older, chipset that HD had integrated into the system. However, this is not going to be a gaming machine by any means. You are going to need to seek out a discrete graphics card solution. So in other words, a laptop with not quite desktop graphics performance, but best in class if you're really trying to game. Anything that's integrated like this rather than discrete is not going to deliver on the latest and greatest games. However, if you're just looking to game off Steam and play a lot of the older titles, or even some new titles that just aren't as demanding, this will do a very good job. And the display is fantastic, again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, so that certainly does not hurt. But something important to point out about graphics and processing performance. You're not going to see a tremendous gain here. That isn't what Haswell is really about, at least under the current drivers that are out in the marketplace. I want to talk about the back end of the device because, as I mentioned, all of the ports have been relocated here. As you can see right there, as it comes into focus, we've got our power port as well as, still trying to get it in focus here. There we go. We have our power port on the far left, which also has an LED, you may notice right next to the battery icon. We also then have a headphone jack, 2 USB 3.0 ports that one of them is enabled for charging a device of your choice while the machine is sleeping. Of course, you have to enable that in the OS like any other Ultrabook. And then we have an HDMI out port. Also, on the right side of the machine, we have our full-size SD card slot, which also accepts memory stick, of course, since this is, after all, a Sony machine, and that format is still somehow alive. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see it axed in the not-so-distant future. Some ventilation. By the way, another thing I want to point out, as I mentioned, the ventilation, big improvement from the Duo 11 there because this machine, just a lot less fan noise, and I'm going to chalk that up to Haswell being, again, a better performer when it comes to heat and, of course, battery life. That is the emphasis on Haswell. So another thing I noticed, a lot less fan startup than you'll find with the Duo 11. And the Duo 11 is a relatively quiet machine, but the 13 just seems to have, again, resolved any kind of questions you may have had about it being noisy on this new generation. In terms of the back side of the machine, you can see right there at the top is the NFC contact point. Let it come into focus. Flanked by rubber feet. Again, these are features that really were integrated into the sheet battery on the Duo 11. Of course, vacant now, added on because there is no sheet battery. That's what I was referring to when I said vacant. We've got the 8-megapixel camera here on the left side, which actually performs relatively well. I would say it's definitely the best camera I've ever seen on an actual computer, in this case, a convertible hybrid. Overall, the build is slightly different, and that's one of the reasons I'm showing the backside of this machine. A little bit more polycarbonate plastic build than what was found in the Duo 11, but this is not really a criticism. You have to understand Sony had to come up with a way in order to cram everything in here, make it fit, run cool, and obviously look good at the same time. So this is part of the change in design. We've got ventilation on the left and right side. Also the branding, a little bit more populous on this machine than the Duo 11. Again, these are just things I've noticed over the course of using both. As you can see down at the base of the machine, we still have our volume buttons as well as assist, which will bring you up into basically the help feature, recovery feature of this machine like any other Sony. And then we have a speaker grill that extends across the entire base of the design. So a little bit better audio than probably anything else in its class on the market, slightly louder than the Duo 11. Again, still very similar. The 11 did not have a grill that reached across the entire base of the machine, but same placement in terms of location. I want to take you around here to the right side of the machine, if I can bring it into focus. And you'll see right there we've got the pen holder. The stylus experience is relatively solid, an improvement overall from the Duo 11. Still working with n-trig, so if you're looking to use it in things like Photoshop, you're going to unfortunately not be able to do that. But for someone who is looking for a pen experience, a stylus experience, you're going to be really pleased with this overall. Don't be scared away by n-trig. I know the Duo 11 didn't have the most glamorous reviews when it came to pen input, but this is an improvement. And the actual pen design was even an improvement. So you've got two different modes here where you can actually use it as a palette to hold the pen, as you can see right there, or just as a traditional holder. There's another piece that's included. So that's certainly another nice component to this machine, another cue, something that was thought of. Where are we going to put the pen? Many Duo 11 users felt like they were left high and dry with nowhere to put the pen except for an optional accessories, which were very pricey, $150 for the extended battery sheet, and I think I believe it was $50 or $60 for the optional case, which also gave you a place to stow the pen. But now, of course, built in, which is a nice thing. Let me go around the machine to the other side, which is the power button on the left side. Another difference in design, clear difference, the power button relocated from the right side, a different button altogether. We now have a flat, more of a complete button. When I say complete, I mean it's part of the finish rather than clearly standing out as a power button. I have mixed feelings about this. I find myself sometimes thinking I've hit the button and not. Again, this is personal experience. This isn't going to apply to all of you. And it's not really a complaint, just an observation from using this hybrid. But that's all that you're going to find on the left side. So really, as I mentioned, everything has been moved to the rear of this device, which some users will love, others will hate. Personally, I am really not a tremendous fan of this because also this means that as I mentioned before, your charge light is now at the back of the machine, which means you can't just glance at the front of this machine to know if it's fully charged. This may just be something that I'm not a fan of, but I don't think many people out there will love the fact that they'll have to pick up or look at the back of the machine in order to know whether it's charged. Of course, you can always just power it up, bring up the backlight. That's not a tremendous issue either. That's another very easy way to get access. Now, in terms of actual performance, I'll just show you right now how quickly the orientation switches. Again, about the same as what you'll find with the Duo 11 and anything else on the market, especially running a Haswell-based experience. Again, you can see right now the screen is fantastic. I was not exaggerating. With Sony, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, they have a lot to live up to because they make some phenomenal displays, and this is one of them. Again, incorporating the triluminous display technology and that wider gamut of coverage. Another thing I wanted to point out as this pops up, which is perfect timing, is bloatware. There is significantly more bloatware on here than the original Duo 11. Again, not sure why. I know right now you just see Kaspersky, which of course is annoying, but overall there's quite a bit more on here. You may have noticed here I've kept everything pretty much bare bones so that you could see what the experience is like out of the box, but I think the only thing that will actually be welcomed by users is, of course, Art Rage. Having that piece of software with the pen is kind of a must. That's why Sony includes it. But pretty much everything else, whether it comes to Sony's integrated services for media consumption, like music and video, I think most of you won't use that, and of course that's just bloatware you'll find with any Sony device. Their Vaio Care app, all of those things, I'm not going to really get into it, but clearly bloatware more so than actually useful, even though they are supposed to be useful, especially the Vaio Care application. Beyond that, nothing really amazing comes out of the box, so it's really all about the hardware. You may end up having to do a reformat. If I was a brand new purchaser of this system, I would definitely pick the Start Fresh option on a custom configuration. Unfortunately, with the pre-configured systems like we're looking at here, you cannot use the Fresh Start option. That's only for custom configuration. So you will have to actually do a fresh install on your own. And I would expect better performance. Again, that's not to say the performance is bad. It's just I know some of you will be annoyed by some of Sony's software. Their camera software that they've included is better than what you'd find with anyone else, and that's for good reason. Sony, one of the best digital imaging companies in the marketplace, as many of you know from my reviews. Very fond of their cameras, and they've really come back in a big way. It's not just because of Konica Minolta, but really trying to revolutionize the business, much like what we're looking at here. And that's where I give Sony their due credit. And this machine overall really has pleased me beyond my expectations. Like I mentioned, great performance from that Haswell with regard to battery life. Everything is just quick, performs very well. Good graphics performance from the Intel-based 4400 on board, very similar to the 4000, but an improvement nonetheless, which is good because in years past, integrated graphics brought from Intel really couldn't do anything but playback video. So this is definitely a big improvement, in my opinion, that of course started with the Duo 11, but has carried through with this latest gen. Also, I want to talk about wireless. I know that's something a lot of you are going to be concerned about, especially the Duo 11 didn't have the greatest reputation when it came to Wi-Fi, even though it had a great Intel chipset, which for me never had any issues to report, at least. Here we're working with Broadcom, not a favorite of mine when it comes to wireless chipsets, but I can tell you performance has been strong. They have updated drivers multiple times, so for those of you who are worried, have read forums and seen different negative things regarding the Wi-Fi performance of this, I really would not worry yourselves too much, because overall, at least my experience has been that this is very fast, if not even possibly faster than the performance from the Duo 11, which again did have that Intel 6000 generation chip, which was really good. Both, of course, dual band Wi-Fi chipsets. Unfortunately, we don't have any next-gen chipsets here, but that's something that we'll probably see in many new machines, not only from Sony. I know their Flip model, which is pretty exciting, I believe does support next-gen Wi-Fi, so that's definitely a good thing. But dual band is par for the course in machines, especially in this budget range, of course, even in lesser machines. So expect solid Wi-Fi performance. You're not going to have any problems. I would have told you already if I had experienced anything in particular. Now, when it comes to bugs, I already mentioned battery life has been really solid, so I want to get to bugs here. The only thing that I've noticed, which I don't think is necessarily going to even come up in this video, but is that I've disabled the auto screen brightness utility, both in controls as well as within Intel's own applications, and yet often I will notice that the screen brightness is changing on its own. So a little bit of a mind of its own. This product has been out since July. I would expect Sony to have fixed this by now, but I don't know if it's really a hardware issue with this particular unit or there is a larger problem here at play. Based on what I've seen online and speaking to colleagues of mine, I have not actually seen that many instances of this issue to really tell you that it's a widespread problem. There are definitely other users that have experienced it, and they've generally gone through exchanging their machine to get a working one. So that's the easiest way to go about fixing that problem rather than a do-it-yourself option. But definitely keep that in mind. Of course, as usual, I always give you all of you as honest and accurate a picture of whatever I'm reviewing, so I wanted to point that out. But overall, otherwise, the display, battery life, wireless performance, graphics, everything is here. Touchscreen performance also really good. No mistouch issues, no having to touch things multiple times. Everything responds as it should, as you would expect a machine in this class and price point to perform. A little bit of backlight bleed around the edges, but again, it's something that you're going to find with just about every manufacturer on the market right now. You can't really avoid it. I can't really name any manufacturers off the top of my head that are backlight bleed free. So that's another thing I wanted to point out about QC. In terms of overall flex with this machine, a little bit more, as I mentioned, than the Duo 11, but a lot less bezel. Overall, a better design. Even though you don't have as much carbon fiber going on as the Duo 11, it's still built really well. And again, the fact that you no longer have to have other pieces to store the pen or an extended battery sheet, I think on its own is a make or break for many buyers out there. Overall, a really sleek machine weighing in at 2.93 pounds. It's really one of the best designed units I've ever seen on the market. Will there be more polish down the road? Of course. I think Sony's found a winner here, and they're going to continue to look to improve it in any way possible. But right now, this thing is a beast, without question. You've got a great display, great cameras, both front-facing and rear. Again, the front-facing really just is about Skype, as you would expect, but the software included, again, because Sony is just very strong when it comes to cameras, is improved from what you'd find from typical manufacturers that are trying to make competing products with this, like Lenovo, Dell, you fill in the blank, whoever your preference is. They're all trying to make something like this, but nobody, in my opinion, has come up with as good a convertible as what Sony has delivered here in the 11, or, of course, the 13.3-inch version we're looking at today. I also want to show you, open this up, and show you the back end in terms of the difference in design there, because still working with the same clip design that the screen actually hooks into, which you'll see right now as I put this on its side, should come into focus. But the more important thing, the clips are not, but the more important thing that I'm really showing you is the panel. The back panel used to extend across the entire body of the machine. Now we're isolated in the center. The display ribbons are kind of tucked away. People who think they've gone away in this version are incorrect. They're still there, otherwise we wouldn't have a connection to the display. But definitely cleaned up, and as you may have also noticed, we now have even more ventilation here on both sides, which is part of the reason I think this machine runs considerably cooler than its predecessor. Again, less fan noise, which is a good thing, but a little bit more range of motion also with this screen when it actually disconnects, but that's really neither here nor there, I think, in the scope of things for most users. Keyboard, again, major improvement in my opinion. That's not to say the Duo 11 was not serviceable, but for those of you who are looking for a more realistic keyboard, something closer to what you'd find in most 13.3-inch machines, most full-size Ultrabooks, at least that's what Ultrabooks get to at full size, that's what you're going to find here, unless, of course, you're going with Samsung and their 15-inch models. So overall, really like this machine. The fixed angle, that's another thing I know a lot of you have in mind, not a problem for me. It is a slightly different angle than the original Duo 11, which doesn't serve me perfectly, as I mentioned before, if I'm laying in bed or on the couch. This machine is still light enough, even though you wouldn't expect to take a 13.3-inch convertible with you in the household. It's more of a mobility machine. I can tell you it definitely has that viewing angle issue when you're below the screen, but otherwise the screen just looks gorgeous. No viewing angles to report, or viewing angle issues, I mean, to report otherwise. Touchscreen, again, performs really well. I know I didn't demo the actual Art Rage Studio software. I'll just do a little bit with my finger. I'm not really bringing out the pen right now. The actual screen manipulation going from closed to open, fairly simple, much like the Duo 11, but they did make it slightly smoother for those of you who took issue with it in the past. But there you can see tracking is really accurate, as well as sensitivity is pretty good. Of course, I'm not going to really be able to demo that with my finger, but nothing new to expect out of this. You have your palette here with all your different instruments to write with, whether you want to use paintbrushes, pens, or pencils, and then you can go to town with the stylus. Again, this machine is more about the mobile professional that wants something fun to work with that's also productive and efficient and looks great and just has great battery life. And Sony's done that here. The whole UI with Windows 8 just works as it should, much like the Duo 11. And as long as you can, deal with the budget issue, the fact that this machine is so expensive, then I think you'll be more than happy with the overall performance. Again, the i5 configuration is now available at multiple retailers. You don't have to go direct with Sony, but this version, the i7 configuration, which is the one I would recommend out of the different available choices, is certainly more expensive, and you cannot find that at any retailer other than Sony presently. You can also pick this up in a white color. I want to mention that. There is a carrying case that Sony sells for $50. Of course, you don't have to go with it, but it's going to be hard to find one that will accommodate this properly. I do like the new start button. Definitely easier to press for those of you that are curious. That may sound ridiculous, but it is true. The original start button, because of it being overlapping, just didn't give you quite as confident a click as this one does. So another very small design cue difference that I think, I'm not going to say goes a long way, but it's important in the overall polished, finished feel of this Duo 13. Really like that we've got less bezel. I know most users will as well, and that's part of the reason Sony was able to accommodate all of this in not much larger of a footprint than the original Duo 11. It's kind of one of those moments where Sony looked at the device and said, we can do better, and they really have. So from the ground up, this hasn't been redesigned, but a lot of cues have been taken in order to make this a far better machine than the Duo 11. Whether or not it actually is another story. But worth its price, I would say yes. Right now, there's nothing else like it on the market. So again, if you can deal with that cost of getting into the club, then it's well worth it. Beyond that, I'm trying to think if there's anything else to let you all know before wrapping things up. But I think I've covered just about everything. Again, I do want to point out that having NFC is definitely a welcomed addition. Enough manufacturers are not doing it. Of course, Sony does have a mission there because they have a lot of different products, whether we're talking about tablets, smartphones, or wireless speakers, as well as home theater systems that integrate NFC, I believe now at this point, or they have them in the works. So a good reason for Sony to really launch NFC across all things they make. Other manufacturers simply aren't up to snuff when it comes to that, and I'd like to see better integration. So an exciting convertible here, even though it's been out a couple of months now, still, in my opinion, one of the best on the market, and definitely lives true to its original predecessor, the 11. So overall, really like what I've seen with this machine so far. You can see Wi-Fi loading up here, and this is from a distance, no question about it. Everything just works as it should, smooth as butter. And this is part of what's nice about Sony and their Duo line, is that you really do get the best of both worlds. And if this was any heavier, I would tell all of you it's really not a competent replacement for a tablet. But the fact of the matter is that its weight is still serviceable at that under 3-pound mark. Also want to point out that unlike the Duo 11, this did lose its composite out, VGA out, so they do include an adapter that will hook up to the HDMI out at the back of the machine. You also lose the Ethernet port, which may sound trivial to many who rely solely on Wi-Fi on a day-to-day basis, but for those of you out there in the field who still require a hardwired connection, you will have to purchase an adapter of sorts. Sony makes their own. I'm not sure about third-party ones working. But another thing I did want to point out, which I think will be critical to some users that are picking this up from a purely business perspective. For college students, that will probably be less of an issue. But again, this is a really pricey machine for a student. So I hope you're in grad school if you're picking one of these up. Again, all about productivity. The pen works well. Touchscreen is great. Overall quality of the screen is phenomenal. And you've got just the best in breed right now with the latest generation of Haswell, as well as graphics performance. Again, if you do need to do serious gaming, then you should be looking at a real discrete option, not something built in like the Intel HD 4400. But overall, really pleased with this. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.